One day, my dad told me about the Starfish story, but something about it really sat with me, and I said, okay, I think I won't lie, when I started this journey. So for me, this has been a more like cozy, warm, and intimate experience, and this is something we've seen and experienced a lot. I hope that those places don't exist. I'm a non-confrontational person. I think with respect to fashion, climate, and everything that is unfolding in the world today, I think we're in a very scary place. Humans should be able to ask for without shouting, without there being a protest of any kind. Is every decision or choice that we make is inherently political. I also wanted to have everything. I have made the purchase. I need my product now.
Hello and welcome to Rethink with Refash. I'm your host Avantika, and this season we are diving into fresh conversation about fashion, mindful living and conscious choices that will shape our future. Let's start our second episode with Jia, a brand strategist whose work fuses with storytelling and conscious consumption. Welcome to the show, Jia.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jia, I wanted to ask the question first about how did you start your sustainability journey? So was it a moment which kind of switched off that aha moment for you where you wanted to switch to sustainable living, or it was sort of a journey and you're still on that journey? So how is it?
So I think for me, it's very much still a work in progress, and I take many steps forward and a few steps back. I think over the last 8 or 9 years or so, I found that I was experiencing a lot of anxiety about the state of the world and the climate, and I felt like I was in a position where I was feeling helpless, where I was unable to do anything on an individual level to bring about change. And oftentimes, these conversations would make themselves, would become mainstays at like dinners and family gatherings. And one day, my dad told me about the Starfish story. And the Starfish story is actually adapted from a book, I think, but it's a really beautiful story with a lesson. And it's about how there's an elderly gentleman who goes to the beach every day, and on his beach walks, as he's strolling, he finds a young boy picking up starfish from the sand that have been washed ashore and throwing them back into the sea. So he watches this day after day after day, and he's partly inspired, but also finding it strange, because there are so many that make themselves, that get swept ashore every day. And so one day he goes to this young boy and he says, "Son, what are you doing? You're not going to be able to save all of them. And this is a futile exercise." And he picks one up, and with great conviction, he says, "I'm going to make a difference to this one." And I don't know what it was about the timing or about the story, but something about it really sat with me, and I said, okay, I'm not perfect. My journey isn't going to be perfect. I will make mistakes. But if in my own way I can, make a little bit of a difference, then that in itself is a great start, and it'll help alleviate some of that anxiety that we get with the state of the world. So that's how it began for me. And ever since then, I've very much been a huge proponent of or an advocate for thrifting and for swapping clothes. And my sister, my mom, and I have shared a wardrobe for as long as I can remember. And we, whenever we travel, we try and go to the local vintage stores or the flea markets to shop as much as possible, and of course attending swaps as and when they happen. I also invite my friends over every couple of months, and then I just sort of give them what I've either
exchange of things.
Or what I don't see myself wearing, but what I see them wearing, so that it's a win-win for both people. And back in Kenya where I live, we do a lot of a little bit of that as well. Yeah.
So I think that Starfish story was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And also I can relate with you when you say that you have a sister and your mom. So I also have a sister and my mom, and all of us share clothes from each other. So I think that actually adds to your wardrobe because you can
Absolutely.
exchange clothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really fun. So as a brand strategist and also a content creator, how do you partner with brands? Because in today's time, social media pushes a lot of overconsumption.
True.
So how do you really manage all of that? Because a lot of brands would be coming to you for collaboration or partnership.
So that's a great question. I think I won't lie. When I started this journey, when Instagram was a bit of an incidental journey for me, but when it started, I was doing a lot of different collaborations, and not all of them were conscious or with small brands. But as time went by, I would say over the last 5 or 6 years, I have been able to take a good look at the collaborations or the clients that I'm collaborating with, and I realized a couple of things. I realized that because I was changing direction or changing gears, I wanted to continue to help tell the story for these small brands. But because I knew that alone couldn't pay my bills, I started consulting on the side. And so what that did was it opened up my horizons, because I could now consult for small brands that put impact first. And as far as making content is concerned, I was able to make content freely and I could go to sleep, with this feeling of peace and calm that there was less dissonance between the kind of life that I want to lead and the products and the brands that I support and advocate for.
So, can you share an example with us or a story with us where you had to make a decision between, something which paid you well and wasn't much sustainable, or you had to, choose something which was more towards your ethics and give up the money?
Sure. I think without naming names, there have been lots of instances in the last few years where I have received emails and messages asking me to collaborate with big brands, and now it's a very clear no. But initially it was really hard to turn down some of these brands because it would mean you become a part of their community, B, it would mean it was good money, and we were only starting out at the time. But now I think with time, it's like a muscle, right? You start practicing the no muscle and eventually it gets stronger and it becomes easier. And so now I feel like it doesn't matter who approaches me. I know I will not say yes. But I feel I get a lot of satisfaction and delight and joy out of making content and doing storytelling for small brands that are so small sometimes that they sometimes make stuff to order, or they only manufacture trans-seasonal clothes, so they don't have clothes that they produce on a quarterly basis. And I think those kinds of brands bring me a lot of joy. And I think you also get to know the founders and the creative directors on a more personal level, whereas with some of these bigger organizations, the structures and the hierarchy is such that you only end up coordinating with often the marketing director or the PR person, and you don't end up meeting a lot of the people that actually were responsible for the design or the philosophy behind the garment. So for me, this has been a more like cozy, warm and intimate experience. And like I said, I think initially it was a lot harder, but now I've started to find that I enjoy my work a lot more when I'm able to when there's less dissonance between the kinds of brands that I want to support and the kind of life that I want to lead.
Yeah, that is wonderful. So I have another question.
Sure.
You also travel a lot.
Yes.
So I also wanted to know about how can people be more mindful while traveling, because you are also trying to promote mindfulness and slow living while traveling. So would you like to talk about that?
Of course. Thank you for that question. I think there are many ways that one can travel responsibly, consciously, or even slowly in a more meaningful way. And I think one could look at it, one could consider many different factors that come into the equation. One is obviously the means you use to travel. So if you're in the country and driving is possible, then driving holidays are as sustainable as they get. And, you know, very often it's not one person sitting in a car. It's like you're traveling with friends or colleagues or family members. And so a lot of you get into the car. And I think it's not just about the destination, then it's also about the journey and what you discover along the way and what you share, you know, by way of music or food. And so wherever possible, I think driving holidays are highly recommended. When it's absolutely not possible and you need to take a flight, I would recommend flying with greener carriers and taking a direct flight as opposed to a stopover flight, because direct flights leave a lighter footprint. Lighter is relative when it comes to air travel, but you understand what I'm saying. I guess the most important things that come up for me are to support local businesses and local tour operators. So, you know, whether you're traveling to Bali or Thailand or Sri Lanka or even parts of southern India, for instance, it's advisable to support a local tour operator, like a smaller business, because you know that the proceeds or your contribution will go on to affect them directly, positively. Whereas when you're working with one of these big tour companies, there's so much filtration that happens that by the time you reach, you know, and you look at your profits, very little goes to the people who actually do the hard work that goes behind, you know, the R&D for the tours. So I would say to support local tour operators as much as possible in every destination and country you visit. And there are so many, you know, and there are some that specialize in ethical tourism as well. So you can look at those. The other would be to go with B&Bs, not necessarily Airbnbs, but to go with bed and breakfast, where you get like a more cozy, intimate, more homestay kind of vibe. And while that's not everyone's interest and while that's not everyone's cup of tea, you can also then broaden your scope and go for a boutique property that has not 200 rooms like a chain property, but like 8 to 12 rooms. And I think that for me is the sweet spot, because then you are able to interact, have more interactions and learn more about the destination and the property from the people that are managing it. And very often the founder or the owner is also an intrinsic part of your guest experience. So, you know, you get to know them on a deeper level just as well as the destination. I think there are so many, you know, like to obviously not litter, to leave behind, to leave places behind better than when you found them. But I would say that the other 2 or 3 that come to mind is to not photograph people unless you ask for consent. And this is something we've seen and experienced a lot in East Africa, but essentially I remember I was in Zanzibar in 2017, and there were these kids that had come from a college trip. And the teachers, for some reason, I don't know where exactly they were from, but the teachers were saying, oh, take photos of everything. And, you know, there were kids playing football, and there were mothers who were having their hair braided. And the instinct is to take a photo. But I think it's important to pause and to be like, would they be comfortable with this? And I think there are so many ways that we can ask for consent in this situation and ask them if they are comfortable being photographed. And, you know, there are lots of photographers now on Instagram that not only ask for consent, but they also have Polaroids that they carry with them, so they can share like the photo with the people, so they have something that they can keep. And I think that's really beautiful. And lastly, I would say to not visit, so when it comes to like seeing animals out in the open, whether it's underwater or in a safari. Ideally to work with ethical tour operators or with companies that put the well-being of the animals first, and not to go to places where you're either scaring the animal or you're treating the animal badly, or you're in a position where there's too much pressure because of the crowds that come in to see the animal. And this can happen with lion sightings in parts of Africa or even in Gir. It can happen with tiger sightings in places like Ranthambore and Madhya Pradesh. It can also happen when people go to see whale sharks, and or when people go dive with animals, with undersea creatures. And I think there's a very thin line between learning more about them and appreciating them, and getting too close for comfort and like invading their personal space. So, yeah, and I think lastly, I mean, of course, when we were young, most of us didn't know any better, but I think not going to any of these aquatic marine parks where, dolphins and whales are kept in captivity, that is something I wish we hadn't done growing up, but I hope that those places don't exist, because it's not fair to see them like that. So yeah.
I absolutely agree with you on so many of those points, and a lot of them were new to me as well.
What would be your pick?
So definitely not visiting aquariums or zoos, because now I think in a lot of hill stations, the government is trying to build new zoos.
True.
To build more tourist attractions. But honestly, I don't think that a lot of those animals who are not used to the hill climate should be there.
Yeah.
So definitely that. And other thing would be not littering, because right now when we go to a lot of hill stations which are commercialized, you see a lot of pollution.
True.
And now in a lot of hill stations we see those dump yards.
Yeah.
And that is just so
Terrifying.
sad to see, because they don't have proper waste disposal systems.
Yeah.
So we have started building dump yards in mountains, and that is not how it's supposed to be.
True.
So that is something we can work on.
Absolutely.
So when you're traveling, how do you prepare yourself? Do you make a list of places which are ethical or more mindful, or you just go there and you just explore? How do you plan your journey?
This is so interesting. I think when I was in my 20s, I used to plan a lot more, but now I'm a bit of a spontaneous traveler. So I don't have like my trip figured out end to end. I leave some room and some leeway for experiences or to change accommodation if need be. And very often I find that this little bit of flexibility allows room for more immersive experiences that I wouldn't have found out about until I visited a destination. Right. So I'm trying to think, but like, especially places that I have revisited, I go without an itinerary, because you have an idea, you're familiar with their surroundings, what are your favorite places to hang out at or to sit at or to grab a coffee at. So I think allowing yourself to be spontaneous and in the moment gives you that room. So like if I had planned, I'd gone to Goa for a few days and it was a few quiet days, but I didn't have anything planned. And I think because I didn't have anything planned, I found out about sound healing, for instance, that was happening in the area. And I think if I had planned, breakfast, lunch and dinner here, or like yoga here and lunch here and dinner here, then there would be no scope to get out of these things. So I think because there wasn't so much structure, it allowed for me to sort of participate and, take up some of these experiences that I really, really did enjoy.
Yeah, I agree with you, because whenever we are traveling and we make up an itinerary from the internet, we'll find all the commercial places
True.
and all the famous restaurants, and we'll usually find very crowded places. And if we visit a place and we maybe take help from the locals, we will find some really beautiful gems which we might have missed. So yeah, I think that is wonderful.
Very true.
And I have heard that you're very passionate about social justice.
I am.
So what is your take on the social justice part of climate change and also the fashion industry when it comes to social injustice?
Okay, so I think I'm slowly learning how to use my voice, because I've never been, I'm a non-confrontational person, and I find now that advocacy has become a very strong fire in my belly, but at the same time, I want to do it in a way that doesn't feel wrong for me personally. And so sometimes it looks different because I could be quiet on social media, but I could participate in a workshop or a donation drive, or we all have different ways of showing up for
Absolutely.
the injustices.
Yes.
or show solidarity for and support a cause that is close to our heart. I think with respect to fashion, climate, and everything that is unfolding in the world today, I think we're in a very scary place for the lack of another word. And I think it's because on some level, like, overconsumption has reached a point where, we're doing far too much damage. A lot of the injustice and a lot of the violence that's taking place in the world today is not just claiming thousands and thousands of lives, but it is also negatively affecting and irrevocably affecting the climate and our environment. And it's putting so much pressure on even the tectonic plates. And, and like I was listening to a couple of climate advisors and advocates on Spotify the other day, and they were talking about how it's really unfortunate, but when you look at the resurgence of hurricanes and floods and earthquakes that have happened in the last 3 or 4 years, they have also started to, they have found like a pattern with violence in the world as well. So I think like, I keep coming back to this thought that we feel that us as individuals, that our life is separate from everything that's happening around us. But in fact, I feel like that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yes.
Everything around us is interconnected. Every decision or choice that we make is inherently political, So I think when it comes to, I won't digress any further, but I think when it comes to fashion, the really important, when you think back of the Rana Plaza tragedy that happened so long ago, and it's something that, it's a horror that persists. I think we can think about a few things. One is workplace conditions and workplace safety for workers who are working in fashion and textile. I think a lot of times we forget that a lot of the clothes that we wear or are gifted or have bought contain dyes that inherently that are carcinogenic or poisonous and inherently end up hurting and harming the lives of the artisans that have worked on them, and then they go into our waterways and they create and cause a lot of damage there. The other is, of course, like basic things that humans should be able to ask for without shouting, without there being a protest of any kind, is decent work hours, fair pay, ventilated workspaces, good and decent working conditions, the fact that their needs for rest, hydration, sleep, and safety are met. I think these are very, very basic things, but unfortunately, if you look at the landscape that is fast fashion, and this, and it continues to grow in every country, I think these things are not being met. And I think when people become a little bit more connected to the journey that their clothes have taken from the fabric sourcing all the way, or yarn sourcing even, all the way to completion, they'll realize that a lot of people in many situations were actually negatively impacted by this garment, So I think it becomes really important to ask yourself, who made my clothes? What was their life like? What is their life like? What do their working conditions look like? How much do they make? If a garment is sold for $200, how much do they end up receiving? And I also think stuff like giving women, and especially women with young children who have no place or no creche to keep their children, while they're working these ridiculous hours on a shift. I think provisions should be made, particularly by these giants and conglomerates, to allow for safe spaces for women to have a place where their children can rest and feel at ease while the mums are out working, because obviously a lot of the workforce is women. And yeah, so there are many points, of course. There's the bit about how a lot of these effluents go and hurt our waterways, and then we end up consuming, like us and other animals, we end up consuming some of this stuff, and how we don't even know some of the long-term reactions of the chemicals that we are ingesting unknowingly. And aside from the workplace for the artisans, I think it's about what you said about landfills, and about how a lot of people will have incinerators where they will start or lighting fires in the landfills. And when you look at some of these landfills, they don't just have khadi kapra or cotton. They will have plastic, and you will see really toxic, noxious gas that will come out as a result of that burning. And we are all breathing that stuff, everywhere in the world. So I think the pressure is on us as individuals, but also people who work in spaces like this, to sort of raise our voice in a way that feels natural to us. And like I said, I'm still learning how to use my voice in a way that feels true to me. But yeah, what about you? What is the bit that irks you or annoys you the most?
So initially, when I started my sustainability journey, I was not aware about how big role does the fashion industry play in this. And when I researched about it, and I found out that the fashion industry is the second largest polluter after oil and petroleum, I was shocked. I was like, how can fashion be the second largest polluter? But then I read a lot of studies and watched a lot of documentaries and videos, and I also learned about the injustice that was happening to the workers. I mean, that is just so wrong. And the owners of those brands are getting richer, and those people are working for 18 hours, and they barely have enough money to survive. So that was the time when I completely swore off fast fashion. I was like, no, this is something which I can't support at all. So when you talk about advocating how it feels more natural to you, so what can the viewers do if they want to be more conscious while choosing how to buy clothing or fashion, choosing fashion brands?
I think I would say pausing and sitting with your purchase is a really important step that most of us don't consider, but it really does help. And I think for younger people particularly, it allows them that time to pause and to think about whether that purchase will add to their life or it will just drain their bank account. Because as a 20-something-year-old, 10, 12 years ago, I was in a space where I also wanted to have everything, and at that point I realized that we were making a lot of purchases, impulse purchases and purchases on the fly without realizing how much wear will come out of these garments, or how I will go on to then put this candle or this lamp or this thing into my space. And I think, very often, and this is a practice that my sister and I do quite often, is that if we really want something, we keep it in our cart and we minimize it, or we open a new window. And a few days later, if we think about it and we want to go back to revisit that cart, very often if there are like 3 items in that cart, I will remove 1 or 2 and I'll just take the one thing that really speaks to me. But if I see something, so say when we're done and I go onto my phone and you get ads for stuff all the time, I'll see 3 really nice things that I like. If I make that purchase right away, I'm buying those 3 things, but there's no guarantee that I'm going to, on how many times or how often or how much use I will get for that garment or that thing. But I think if it sits and you sleep on it and you just keep it, like, it's almost not even top of mind anymore, but you think about it later, I think that's, it's a very simple, but for me it's a very, it's a practice I go back to. The other one would be obviously not to shy away from hand-me-downs or second-hand, to buy and to buy from ethical thrift stores, because even thrifting can be unethical.
Yes.
Especially if it's done in a very massy kind of way. If it's if people are going to pick up garments from an export reject shop and then selling it to you and selling hundreds and thousands of garments on a weekly basis, then that also is not conscious, or so I think also finding, like, making a list of thrift stores, both online and offline, that are doing this, attending events like Refash, of course, that allow for engagement, conversation and discussion, where you can learn from your peers and from people you meet, but also get a chance to bring some garments perhaps to swap if you'd like. And so I have actually found that very enriching, because I've also met a lot of people who think like us, and sometimes when you're on this journey you feel like you're alone, or that there aren't too many people who think like you. But when you get out of your comfort zone and you attend these events, you realize that no, there are so many people who think like this, and there's so much I can learn from them. And I think also supporting weavers or weaving clusters that are very uncommon, because a lot of these arts are slowly dying out. So if you find that there is something in some specific part of West Bengal or Maharashtra or Madhya Pradesh, where there are now very few people doing something that is so beautiful, I think we should try and encourage that, and also allowing for these artisans and small brand owners to take time to send the garments to you. I think very often, because of how instantaneous everything is on the internet, it is possible for you to get anything that you want at the click of a button within a few minutes even, or a few hours, or same day delivery. And I think small business owners or people who create in small batches or make stuff to order cannot fulfill that requirement. So I think it's also our responsibility as consumers and people who are learning and people who want to become advocates for slow fashion or for this kind of lifestyle, to be patient with these brands and to allow them the time. Like up to 2 weeks, 4 weeks, I have waited up to 8 weeks for garments to come in. And I'm not saying everyone should have to wait for 8 weeks. I think if you need something urgently, pick the small business that is able to make. Very often you have pieces off the rack as well. But don't rush the process. I think a lot of that beauty and that richness from the craft gets lost in this I don't know, in this idea that we have of urgency. Okay, I have made the purchase. I need my product now. You know, and I think like this instant gratification has ruined some of the anticipation also that comes with receiving these kind of garments. Because if you like something, then you wait a few days, you place the order, and then you wait a few more days or even weeks, and then the order arrives. I think that's a really beautiful journey. But I think more often than not, and I too get caught up in this, like if I need something urgently for a puja that's happening at home, you order it and it arrives, right? But I'm trying not to do that with fashion and textile.
Right.
I'm trying to be more mindful. I'm trying to check myself. I also have a few friends and family, and I ask them, a few friends and family who believe strongly in these values as well, and I ask them to check me as well and to be like, do you really need this right now? Can't it wait until December?
I would like to end this session up by a fun game.
Okay, sure, let's go for it.
So this is a word association game.
All right.
I will say a word and then you say something which comes up in your mind
Okay,
related to that word. Okay?
ready.
Ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So, revival.
Revival. My dadi's sari that we had stitched into a blouse recently. The sari had gotten udherod, so we couldn't use it as a sari anymore. And I didn't want to lose that. So we had it reworked and stitched into a blouse. And it's actually a really beautiful silk blouse. And I'm just glad that I get to keep one of her favorite pieces that she still loves, but we couldn't wear as a sari anymore. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay. Resilience.
Resilience. Resilience means so many different things. But I think I would say tapping into your inner strength. And I think experiences build resilience, and sometimes we don't realize how resilient we are until we take a look, or until we need to access those parts of ourselves.
Okay. Impact.
Impact. I've been seeing this word used and overused quite a lot, and I think people are trying to not conflate it, but say that we're going to be able to impact the world positively. And I keep coming back to the Starfish conversation, that if you can even positively impact the life of one, and you do that every day or every other day, I think cumulatively it goes on to make a big difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, the last word for you is restore.
Restore. I think similar to revival. For me, every time I think of restore, I think of how heirloom jewelry pieces from the family have shape-shifted and taken different shapes through the generations, and how what belonged to my great-grandmother went to my grandmother, and then my mom, and now me, and how it looked back then and how it looked now. In some cases, it's identical, and in other cases, it just needed a little bit of, not brasso, but the equivalent of brasso. What's that in, you get this, it has like tamarind, and it's a mix that you get in the market. You know which one I'm talking about? Which you use to like make brass shine.
Okay, yeah.
So like we have a lot of old utensils and old even brass serving trays and stuff that have been used by 3 generations before me. And they carry those stories, but all I need to do to look after them or to give them a lease of new life is to just keep them in safely in good condition, but also to use that wherever necessary, like do proper upkeep and to clean. Yeah, that's what it would mean for me.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank
Jia,
you.
for joining us today. It was a really insightful conversation, and I think I learned a lot from you.
Likewise, I learned a lot from you too. Yeah.
And I think our viewers would also learn a lot from this
hope so.
conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Akanksha. Thank you, and thank you, Team Refash, for making this possible. It's been a wonderful conversation, and to every single person who is responsible for putting this together, thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Rethink with Refash. Remember, every small choice leads to a consequence. Let's keep rethinking, reimagining, and reshaping a more conscious world, one step at a time. Subscribe and stay connected with us for more conversations that make a difference. Until next time, keep rethinking.